And thank you, Tierno and Sonia. Of course, coming after them means that you have a lot more pressure to speak proper English during your address. It's not usually the done thing for reporters to be champions of anything. We're advocates, we're not advocates, we're not supporters, we're not activists, and hopefully not partisans. But we are citizens. We are neighbors and PTA parents, customers and churchgoers, and all kinds of other things, along with people, alongside the people that we are during our work week. People who dig and watch and interview and tell stories, find things out, and then pivot toward the public and tell them what we found out. Many of us, maybe even most of us, don't think of ourselves as championing anything, but what is. It may sound a little highfalutin, but in the final analysis, we want to be champions for the truth. We're kind of big on sticking up for the truth, out of a belief in the idea that if any society wants to solve its problems, the debate has to be grounded in the world as it is, the world as it really exists. Along the way, you pick up pieces of the big puzzle, learn things that shape your conclusions. I grew up in an immigrant neighborhood. I grew up with kids who had to go with their parents to open school night because their parents didn't speak enough English to talk to the teacher, and they had to translate. My friends had grandparents who barely spoke English, as I did. I had neighbors who barely spoke English, even after long years in this country. So when anti-immigrant activists just about lose their minds about having to interact with someone at a counter with limited English, or blow a gasket about having to press 2 for English, and then launch into a rant about how in previous generations everybody learned English, and right away, I know, and probably a lot of you know, that that's nonsense. I covered the legislative battle and then the implementation of the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, so I'm old enough to remember when Republican presidents, even ones contemporary Republicans nominate for a kind of secular sainthood, made millions of undocumented people legal and asked much less of them than the bills that sometimes float like trial balloons out of today's House and Senate. I've been on corn farms in Mexico, now only worked by men too old to go north. Since NAFTA undermined corn farming in Mexico and sent tens of thousands of farm boys north to make a living, as tons of American grain headed south, and then watched as Americans embraced and seized on the notion that you could make agriculture less profitable in Mexico, a country with a lot of farmers, make it hugely more profitable in America, a country with a very small number of farmers, and somehow we would only reap the benefits on this side of the border and never have to pay even a little of the human cost of wide open markets. I know couples of different status. I know people who want to get married from different countries and have seen and reported on the human impact of our current immigration system. I know that the latest immigrant flows put us at roughly the same proportion of foreign-born people that we had in this country a century ago, and that the backlash that you see today is nothing new. We've been here before the First World War, in the 1870s and 80s. I hear the angry denunciations of today's undocumented people by the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of earlier immigrants who proudly note that their ancestors played by the rules, went by the book, did it the right way, and then conveniently leave out, or perhaps never even knew to begin with, that for a long time, a really long time, there basically were no rules. If you got here and you weren't insane, sick, or on the lam, you were in. It was as easy as that. Oh, and by the way, I don't want to just leave it out there implicitly. That's a pretty low bar. Not insane, not sick, and not fleeing the law. Part of the problem is that what could be, should be, a more level-headed discussion about who gets in, who gets to stay, and what the rules should be that govern the system is all knotted up with emotion, nostalgia, and national self-concept, along with a very imprecise notion of what our self-interest is as a people today, and how to measure risk. We love those sepia-toned photographs of people wearing the clothes that they had on their backs when they left Palermo and Cork and Hamburg. We love the vaguely foreign hats and the baby clothes and the little tiny American flags in those sepia-toned photographs. We eat that stuff up. Those are the good immigrants. We, as a continent-sized country, are a little less sure about the post-1965 world. The sharp, precise color pictures of Bukharan Jews in Queens, Iranians in Los Angeles, Jamaicans in Brooklyn, Bosnian Muslims in St. Louis, Somalis in Lewiston, Maine, Venezuelans in Miami, Salvadorans in Houston, and Nigerians in Chicago. They aren't, it seems, as romantic. They don't provoke the same upwellings of sentiment in the descendants of earlier immigrants. And it's unclear to me how to talk to the people who are, after all, viewers, listeners, readers, my customers, about a view of immigration today and in the future that's based on reality. A president took office in January who campaigned for a year and a half, telling the people of this country that people were pouring across the border, that we had no border, that the border was out of control, that the people who were coming here, quote, don't love you and don't love our country, when he either didn't know or didn't care that those things were not, are not true. Who didn't know? A candidate who didn't know or didn't care that the majority of undocumented people in the country have been here a long time. The average undocumented person in the United States has been here 11 and a half years, making sending them home a much more complicated thing than just picking up a border crosser and dropping them off by bus, or catching and deporting a young guy who got here 4 months ago and is working in the back of a restaurant. Those 11-plus year people have homes and kids and cars. Many of them own businesses, sometimes a mix of foreign-born and native-born kids living in their households, further complicating the picture. The president, both in office and as a candidate, has missed no opportunity to imply or state outright that the country has a lot to fear from an army of home health care workers, landscapers, nursing home attendants, hotel cleaners, strawberry pickers, roofers, livery cab drivers, trying to convince Americans that this million-strong army of hardworking people are a danger to them, commit crimes in a way that's different than other Americans, when we know, and we've known for some time, that the rate of offending is lower among immigrants than it is among other Americans. A lot of the conversations I hear about what to do are framed in a strictly moralistic idea of what's best for the country, that it must be harsh and punitive or else people will keep pouring in. Except that they're not pouring in. And living the life of an undocumented person is plenty harsh already. That's usually the part of the conversation when we hear about the sainted great-great-grandfather who came by himself as a teenager with 85 cents in his pocket, oh yes, and did it according to the law. How to frame our immigration laws from now on, and what to do about the 11.5 million people already in the country illegally are two distinct problems. They are two separate things that need two separate sets of solutions. Detach them, and all these conversations get a lot easier. I'm not pro-immigrant. I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm a big fan of what works. If we put a new legal regime in place to handle long-term undocumented, the easier the law is to follow, the greater compliance it will attract, the less cheating it will provoke. If you pass a law that's too hard to follow, people won't follow it. Is that really so hard? Is that really so hard? I don't think this is really that complicated. If we put a new set of standards and practices in place to govern people who want to come here from now on, that law should set some bar, put some restrictions in place, but also be flexible enough to deal with the Afghan family sponsored by my church, the kid from San Pedro Sula whose parents sent him north to escape the murderous gangs that have made his hometown one of the most dangerous cities in the hemisphere. And at the same time, we have to continue to do what we've always done. Attract the nervy, smart, and energetic people who want to come here from everywhere to make some inventive dream into a reality. If the quality of the national debate on these topics sets the tone for the debate going forward, we aren't going to figure it out. Every country on the face of the earth has the right to decide who comes in, who stays, and what the rules are. It's one of the privileges that come with national sovereignty. But we should also be guided as we try to figure out what to do now by notions of social utility. If you grab a house painter in San Antonio and force him to go back to Mexico and saddle his high school-age children with the unfortunate choice of heading back to a country they're only dimly familiar with, or have never seen at all in many cases, leave the family home empty with a for sale sign out front, what have you really accomplished? What have you done for the community? What have you done for the country? In San Antonio, or Prince George's County, or the Bronx, or Los Angeles, will those places be more prosperous? Will a family be more likely to succeed if you act out of punitive vengeance rather than out of social interest? I hope that in the coming years, we think this through in a clearer and more fact-based way, because what we're doing now isn't working out so well. I have a suspicion the fights we have about it all is really just a proxy battle for the anxiety already felt by many Americans that the country is changing in ways they don't really approve of, can't really explain, makes them feel out of place rather than secure. Yes, America is changing. It has always changed, and it always will. There's a little too much emphasis on the fact that the Filipino kid whose grandmother came after the laws were changed in 1965, who wears the same sneakers, cheers the same sports team, has the same ambitions of getting over in America, is fundamentally like your own kid, even though the collective impression in the class photo at the end of the year is different. If you don't believe me, ask immigrant grandparents who are really upset that their descendants are becoming too American, while we're knocking them for not being American enough. They get it. They get the transformative power of this country. We've been stumbling through recent years pretending that stuff can zip around the world, that money can cross the globe with a few computer keystrokes, but people are going to stay put. That's an illusion. People never have stayed put, and they never will. If we mean it when we say it, that this is a nation built by immigrants, that this is a nation made great by immigrants, it might be a good idea to really act like we believe it's true, rather than pat ourselves on the back, give ourselves credit for it, while still not really believing it, or that it's going to change this country in coming decades in ways that are going to make us unhappy. So thank you for this lovely award. I'll take it with me up to Amherst and I'll put it on my desk as I consider my own future and start work on a book about that next America and what the things we fight about now as a people tell you about what we're really afraid of. So thanks again. Thanks again to our other speakers who had a much harder job than I did. And good luck and thank you to this organization, and God bless all its work. Thanks a lot.